Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Faces in FinOps podcast powered by ProsperOps. I'm your host, John Meyer. Now, the Faces in FinOps podcast is all about highlighting thought leaders in the cloud financial management space and insights on how they're making an impact within their organization and the broader FinOps community. Our next guest is returning for part 2 of Faces in FinOps as we dive deeper into the AWS discount instruments from basics, advice, automation, and common challenges. Plus, joining us is a special guest from ProsperOps. How about we bring both our guests onto the show? Bryson, thanks for joining me.
Hey, John, happy to be here.
And Grace, thanks for joining me.
Hey, John. Great to be here.
All right, everybody. In part 1, we talked about the different types of discount instruments from savings plans to RIs to CRIs and what the community or even FinOps or what Bryson is seeing within the enterprise as to their uses between them. Also, we had to find out his take between the difference of CFM, Cloud Financial Management, and FinOps. Before we get to those, Bryson, how about you give everybody a recap of what you do at AWS?
Sure thing. So I've been at AWS now for almost 7 years. I started on the worldwide commercial sector CO&O team, did that for a few years until I moved into my current role with the optics team underneath Alex Head. If you do a quick Google or YouTube search, you're going to see a lot of stuff by her and our colleague, Steph Gooch. Essentially, I work on a one-to-one relationship with one of our larger strategic accounts, doing FinOps best practices and CFM best practices, helping them optimize their spend and usage on AWS.
And Grace, what are you doing at ProsperOps?
Hey, John. Yes, I'm the product marketing manager at ProsperOps. I've been at ProsperOps for since last year, and I've been there for about 5 months now. My product marketing career has been a little bit longer, so I had some experience working with DevOps, now in the FinOps space. So this is a really great transition, really interesting market, and seeing a lot of interesting things happen in this landscape.
Bryson, in part 1, we kind of dove a little bit of a high level around FinOps. What are you seeing not only with AWS, your customer, or even other customers that you're talking to around CFM, the FinOps adoption and things. But in this, I really want to dive into the AWS discount instruments, talking about reserve instances, convertible RIs, and savings plans. Before we get to that, I know you're really good at it. I know we did it in part 1, but could you give everybody a definition of what those three are?
Yeah, sure thing. So if we start with the first one that came out, that's a standard reserved instance. A reserved instance is essentially a customer committing to use the same instance type in the same region, operating system, and tenancy for a 1 to 3 year term, paying all upfront, partial upfront, or no upfront, in return getting up to a 72% discount off of EC2 on demand. AWS then came out with a convertible RI, which allows you to stay in the same region, but you can convert the instance type, the operating system, or the tenancy throughout that 1 or 3 year term, as long as you're keeping the total term value of that RI the same or greater. AWS then came out with what we call compute savings plans and instance savings plans, which remove the need for users to manually go in and exchange the RI. Rather, these savings plans operate as an hourly commitment of spend that then apply to the best, highest discount savings usage in that hour, every hour, for a 1 or 3 year commitment.
Bryson, are there advantages to one or the other?
Great question. So if you want the easy button, that's going to be a compute savings plan. For that, if you commit for a 1 year or 3 year term to a set amount of dollarly spend, the system itself is going to go and find the highest discount per hour of usage and just save you the highest amount possible every hour. There are caveats there that you can go to the AWS documentation to pick on, like if you have sharing turned on or off, if you buy it in a linked account at the payer account, etc. But that's what it's designed to do. Now, if you don't want just that easy button, but you want more control over where the savings initially go and you don't want to do a lot of chargebacks, standard RIs are going to apply to that one instance type for a long period of time. You can almost think about it like locking yourself into, say, a C5, so it's a lot easier to account for finance-wise. Certainly with convertible RIs, you're thinking of it as a locked-in amount of money for a time period, and you can do different accounting tricks with that. Though, not an accountant, I can't give you tax advice.
Darn, because that was my next question. Being that it's tax season, I was going to ask you a couple of questions. But really, let's talk a little bit more about the convertible RIs and RIs. Grace, from a convertible RI standpoint, let's talk about some of those advantages that you're seeing.
Yeah, I think as Bryson mentioned, I think there's some advantages with the convertible RIs, and also they're more complex to manage. right? So with convertible RIs, I think you can make some modifications even after you've purchased them. So that makes them a lot more easy to modify, but then harder to manage in the longer term. Say if you want to make exchanges for them a couple of times, there are no limits to how many exchanges you can make on them. But it is, again, harder to manage. So what we've seen is I've done a piece of research where we looked at thousands of data points of hundreds of anonymized AWS orgs. And we looked at what the adoption was for standard RIs, for convertible RIs, and for savings plans. So to corroborate what our guest is saying here is that savings plans by far, because it's the easy button, they are most of the orgs that do have any discount instruments are using savings plans. And then what we've seen is like some adoption for standard RIs, and then the least is for these more complex convertible RIs. I think what's more interesting is that while like discount instruments, there's the savings plan, which is the easy button. There's also just the effort to even make these commitments is sometimes hard for some organizations. So what we've seen is that actually 53%, so over half of the AWS orgs that we analyzed did not have any savings plans or standard reserved instances or convertible reserved instances. I think if they just left it as default and were paying the on-demand rate.
Bryson, are you seeing that, or are you talking to various customers or enterprises that are not utilizing it? Have you kind of evaluated some? I know you're only working with one customer right now, but I know you're probably on other calls to help evaluate maybe their environment and where they can do some potential cost savings.
Sure thing. To your point, with the customers I currently support, I don't see that as much, but that doesn't contradict the point whatsoever. The customers that I'm working with are more of our strategic customers that are locked in with AWS or very close to being our partners, and they leverage those commitment instruments. However, other customers, especially in the, like, say, startup space or the smaller enterprise space, those that are still even migrating directly onto the cloud, they might not be aware of all these commitment-based mechanisms. And to Grace's point, they might be afraid of locking themselves into a 1 or 3 year term as they view it as a contract, not actually an offering.
That was actually going to be my next question. I want to dive into is at 53% not utilizing these discount instruments. One, I know there's the easy button, get as much as you can with it, but there's also some other things around it. They're just afraid to kind of do some cost. I mean, the on-demand price is huge. I mean, that they could do a lot of potential savings around that, Bryson.
Oh, definitely. Standard RIs offer up to a 72% discount, and I believe convertible RIs offer up to a 66% discount. The public website's going to check me on that, and compute savings plans, the instant savings plans, are roughly equitable to that. There's some differences with licensing, but to your point, that's a lot of savings on the table.
Grace, talking with customers and seeing how they're utilizing some of these discount instruments or not even utilizing some of these instruments, do you think it's awareness on that potential savings that they could have on just adopting some of them?
Yeah, I think part of it is awareness. And I think what's interesting is that, well, there's kind of two things. I think it's because in the past, there weren't as many of these different discount instruments. As you mentioned, standard reserved instances came first, and then savings plans. So as more of these instruments are available, I think people are starting to adopt. There weren't as many of these tools as well to help customers manage these commitments, right? And then I think there's another component, which is around the kind of the amount of effort and attention. Smaller startups, they are much smaller, and so the impact of having a commitment and getting those savings is much less than someone who is like a Fortune 500 enterprise. Those companies will, and we've seen in this data too, there's correlation between the basically managing commitments as well as like the magnitude of the spend. So the larger you are, the more you have the resources and maybe the expertise, the more you're less concerned about being locked in because you do have the budget to maintain these commitments, right? And a startup, they're always changing. The usage might be very dynamic, and especially with like AI or machine learning types of startups, I think they'll experience even more volatility in their usage.
Great. So you're saying that, and this kind of really makes sense, is that you're seeing the adoption of the discounts instruments with larger companies and enterprises versus smaller companies because the potential savings might not be there. The more bang for their buck.
Exactly. I think there is some economics around, the bigger you are, the more benefits you can reap from these commitments. And the majority of the research that I did was on effective savings rate, which is a key metric. And I'm sure if you haven't heard these other podcast episodes, I'm sure effective savings rate was mentioned, but it is basically a key metric to help customers understand their rate optimization performance. It really measures the savings outcomes they're getting, their return on investment, essentially. And we found that effective savings rate was much what grew as the company's spend increased, right? So like larger customers, their effective savings rate was like in the, really large customers, really in the like 30 to 50%, which is really great effective savings rate. And then with the smaller customers, sometimes there were even negative effective savings rates. So they maybe mismanaged their commitments. They basically left money on the table, or like weren't even using what they were paying for these commitments because their usage might have changed, or they just didn't have the resources to manage it in time.
Well, Grace was talking about the effective savings rate. And if you want to check it out, look up here, wherever it's going to be on the YouTube. I think it's up on this side. But anyway, click on the link and learn more about the ESR. Bryson, I want to dive in a little bit deeper, not only with the savings plans, RIs, and convertible RIs, but specifically the misconception between the three of those. Can you help us understand that?
Yeah, sure thing. With a standard RI, it's the simplest one to understand. You are, in terms, locking yourself into that instance configuration over time. I know we might not want to use that term locking in, but you are 1 or 3 year term, same region, same instance type, same operating system, and same tenancy. Done. That means that it's a lot easier for you to forecast your estimated savings and costs over the next 1 or 3 years as you've got that thing. Now, to Grace's point, if there's any kind of miscommunication between the team that's buying the standard RI and the team that's going to be using that RI, or rather running the instances that benefit from the RI, you might not have realized savings. There might be miscommunication where you buy it for 3 years, they only use it for 2 years, and you have a whole year of unused dollars where it couldn't happen. That, I believe, goes back to one of the FinOps principles of teams must be in constant communication, must be collaborating all the time. It's very important. The second one with convertible RIs, one common misconception between them is that you can change region with the word in convertible. Nope, you're still regional based, so it's still stuck in that one region. The other misconception we get is not as much anymore, but people used to think of them as like blocks of cost or block discounting, where you're buying a block or so of compute usage that you could use up any time in the month. So say you bought $1 an hour, they thought that was 720 hours of discount usage you could use in one. No, it's spread out throughout the month. It's a steady state usage discounting mechanism. Let's see. Between convertible RIs and savings plans, the difference there really comes down to the manual effort it takes to exchange or convert those into a different configurable type. And the manual effort required there leads to what Grace was talking about. You have the opportunity to lose out on estimated savings if your human or automation isn't fast enough to convert it in terms of what's being covered now.
Grace, are these some of the misconceptions that you're seeing out there between the three different types of discount instruments?
Yeah, I think like the adoption is also related to how complex they are. I think the misconception is, I think people, as you know, like FinOps is such a wide term. We have customers that are in the FinOps space, but they might have been previously like engineers. They may have been previously like financial analysts. So they may not have all the background needed to understand the complexities of it. And sometimes people just didn't have the time to go through the documentation And so this is like some of the complexities. And in their work, they're not just managing commitments. As we all know, they have other priorities, including more of the usage optimization side, right sizing, or like making sure working with a lot of different teams. Again, this is a very complex job that where a person has to work has a lot of different hats that they have to wear, and also be very personable across the different teams. So it's a people management skill that's required, and then there's also like technical skill required to execute on either managing commitments or maybe the usage optimization side. So I definitely think it's a very complex role, and it's about figuring out how to prioritize and automate away some of the maybe more just executable tasks that a machine may be able to do, so that our customers sometimes they don't have time to focus on those other priorities in their work. So yeah, I think if I'm answering your question, I'm just saying that it's quite complex what we see, and not everyone has the background to fully understand every single different piece of being a FinOps practitioner.
That's actually a very valid point. And Bryson actually touched on it, and then you kind of overlapped it with regards to if you're looking at it from a FinOps culture and perspective, you have the three teams or three groups. You have, finance, you have the business and engineering collaborating together. Bryson, I have a very curious question for you. And you mentioned about the unused, right? So if I bought a 3-year term on an RI and I only used it for basically our project changed, right? And I had 1 year. What happens to the other 2 years? Is there something that we can do about it from an RI or a CRI standpoint?
Great question. You read my mind. One misconception that customers have about RIs is that, and savings plans, is that you should always be aiming for, say, 100% coverage and 100% utilization of both the RIs and the savings plans. Now, while 100% utilization of your RI or savings plan is a great goal, meaning that you're maxing out every possible savings you have of that, it's not required for you to save money on your instance or on your usage. Just as a mathematical example, if you've got, say, you're buying a savings plans that's got a projected 50% savings rate over on demand over 3 years. Well, technically, if you use that savings plan 100% utilized for only a year and a half, and then you complete switch instances, you saved over on demand. You can let it run out for the rest of the term, and you still saved. Anything over that break-even mark is additional cash in the bank. You can apply that same logic with standard RIs, convertible RIs, savings plans. It's all math. Now, to your point, if you find yourself in a situation where you have unused RI or savings plans dollars, with a standard RI, you are locked into that RI. So while you can't change what can be covered, that's an opportunity for you as a FinOps practitioner to go to your engineers and developers and ask them if there's any way they can use that instance type. Say you locked into a 3-year C5, they're all running now C6Gs, C6As. If they have dev test workloads, if they have anything they want to mess around with, they can use that, and it's almost free money because you've paid for it. Conversely, if you want to get rid of it and you are eligible to do so, you probably can look into selling it on the AWS marketplace. Now, that only applies to standard RIs. With a convertible RI, that's your opportunity there to do the same thing. Ask your end users if they can use that instance type, but you can convert it. You can go in and say, oh, I've had a C5 for 3 years. It's 2 years in. Customers using a C6G, I should exchange that. You can now go through the math and the process it would take to exchange it to something that is going to better cover your current usage. Before you do that, though, make sure you talk to your business units and ensure that what you're going to exchange it to is something they predict they're going to use for the rest of that term. Just because you see in the curve file that they're using C6Gs now, you don't know they're going to use those C6Gs for the next 9 months. Make sure that you're aware of that before you exchange, because once you exchange, no takesy backsies. Now, with a CSP or ISP...
I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. That was pretty good.
Now, once you got...
I'll give you a chance to take a drink if you want as you're going, but no takesy backsy. So once you buy it, you're done. That was pretty good, Bryson. Go ahead.
Yeah. And to be clear, just so I don't get in trouble, with AWS, I do believe we have a waiting term when you buy a net new RI savings plan where you can create a support case and you can ask for a mistake. But once you have it and you do that exchange, pretty locked in. With a CSP and ISP, if you've got unused dollars, with a CSP, that's really your opportunity to bring net new workloads onto AWS. since a CSP is going to cover any compute workloads, as well as some Lambda and some Fargate, you've got free money for your account teams to start running new dev test projects, start moving things. Maybe you can migrate from on-prem to AWS because you've already locked into paying that. So use it. If you have an ISP, same thing, but they need to use the instance types that you've covered. So while a CSP, you could use any instance type you want. With the ISP, you are stuck with that one.
Bryson, that was a very good detailed explanation of the differences between those and how to utilize them. But one of the things that you touched on was that as a FinOps practitioner, you got to go to engineering and you got to say, hey, listen, can you use this? Can you go play with this? It's free money. Go do this. But that is actually a lot of work for one person to manage within a large enterprise. Small companies, not bad. You can manage that one. That's almost like managing your RRs and CRs. What are you seeing with regards to customers and utilizing automation so it can save the FinOps practitioner from having to ask each person to go ahead and spend this or utilize that instance, but exchange it or find ways to improve on cost savings?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm sure once I'm done, Grace is going to have a lot more to say here with the ProsperOps offering. But there are certain offerings on the AWS partner market where you have automation set up that can do those exchanges by yourself. You can also set up certain things using AWS budgets and forecasts where you can send out automatic like utilization reports, coverage reports, expiring RI notifications, all those things like that to help create pipelines of data to your business units so that you're all on the same page as to what's happening, what needs to happen, and what needs to change. But I do want to give the floor to Grace.
Grace, the floor is all yours.
I think automation is very interesting. And as a reaction to what we saw in the data from FinOps Foundation, their State of FinOps report 2024 yesterday, I think that automation is a very loaded word because I think automation spans from obviously no automation to automation with human touch to automation that needs like human to kind of check so that it can execute to fully automated, which is it's running in the background 24/7. You don't need to check or do any action. It will just take the action for you. But I think there's another component of automation, which is there's always like need for customization. So is there something that's fully automated, which also allows some settings or control for the user so that you can add some specificity to the algorithm before it starts operating? So ProsperOps is a fully automated FinOps platform, and it's really interesting that a lot of companies, in terms of like what we saw in the data from FinOps Foundation, or these practitioners are not fully using fully automated solutions. So there's a lot of opportunity in this space. And I think some of it is because it's just the technology still catching up. A decade ago, many things were still very much manual. And it's really great to see that there is different types of FinOps tools. And there's the rate optimization side and obviously the usage optimization side. I think both sides are looking to get more automation.
Bryson, here's an actually very interesting question based off of Grace's feedback. And we're talking about the changes. And one of the things is about your changes of your environment. How has the market changes and evolving technology trends actually impacted not only the purchasing of AWS discount instruments, but maybe CRIs?
Great question. If I think over our customer base, I think the number one we see is that customers are really trying to squeeze every last dollar they can out of those commitments, and they're engaging in a variety of activities to do so, as well as they're trying to ensure that their finance and accounting teams are up to speed with any of those potential downstream impacts. So you see, if you're still on convertible RIs, you see the adoption of partner programs where you can automate or use a bot to do that exchange. With CSPs, you're starting to see more automation of both the identification of what can be covered, really scraping out any last savings that you can get. You also see it with the increased focus on tagging and chargeback, where they really want to know exactly where it's going, why it's going there, and forcing those teams to either adhere to it or get a better forecasting model in place. And then anytime something changes, so say you're all on CSPs, you're on that kind of program, anytime the estimated savings rate changes over time of that, you want to know why. What team changed what when? Why did that impact the downstream savings of it? And is that going to continue in the future?
Bryson, help me understand forecasting and budgeting. It's not something new. We've all experienced it not only on-prem, we've gone into the cloud, and in the last few years, everybody went to the cloud quick, and now cost optimization is a huge deal. But you can't really, it's very tough to forecast. But can you forecast as it relates to AWS discount instruments on what you're going to utilize, and how does that relate to FinOps?
Yeah, great question. So now if I split those into two parts, you can do forecasting with the AWS discount mechanisms where you can work with your business units and figure out both from what usage they're going to be using today and in the future, and then layer on top of that the different pricing models that AWS has to each of those workloads. Now it's going to get a little bit complicated because you're going to be comparing standardized, convertible RIs, CSPs, ISPs, and spot if you really want to look at best practices for compute. But you do have the ability to do that with the tools that AWS offers. You're going to be wanting to use the CUR, obviously, the AWS pricing APIs to get that up-to-date pricing. You might want to look into something like the KPI dashboards or the Kudos dashboards so you can have an up-to-date view of what's covered, uncovered, and future spend. You can lean into AWS tools like budgets and forecasts to do that as well. When it comes to FinOps practices, again, we're leaning on collaboration and communication. All of that work that you're doing, all that data you put in is just data, and you don't know what you don't know. You're going to need to go back to the business units to confirm their 6-month, 9-month, 1-year, 3-year plan of that stuff. And then almost like a candlestick chart of this is what you forecasted. How much could it drop? How much could it go up? And how do we account for that? And then how do we account for any changes in this scenario? Similarly, when we look at trying to engage or utilize variable spend of the cloud, you want to always be open to different cost models. So as you look at, say, a customer migrating from on-prem to AWS, maybe you start with on-demand, then you have your plan within 3 months if they've migrated over to lock them into CSPs. But we should also be always cognizant of what of those workloads can still be improved by adopting ASGs, Spot, or other services.
I want to piggyback off on the culture and the communication. I think it's really important to forecast early and also forecast at the right time, right? Be frequently rather than off and on. So having like a cadence, having a culture that really believes in making sure that forecasting happens. All the right stakeholders are also in the meeting when you're doing the forecasting is important. And so what we hear from some, customers who are very sophisticated FinOps practitioners and in a very mature organization, their best practices is obviously they want to also balance out the engineering. At the end of the day, it's always going to be business value, but like forecasting is definitely where everyone puts their heads together, make sure they have a great product, make sure their customers are happy, and then also make sure that, think there aren't any unexpected changes that will happen in the coming months. However, I do think that sometimes, just cloud usage is sometimes really hard to predict. And there will be instances where some of our customers have unexpected changes in the usage. And I think that's where some of the automation really can help because automation can react to changes. While it's not, as good as like forecasting, right? You know exactly how the usage will change, but at least it's able to adjust your commitments to make sure that your commitments are matching the changes in your usage.
Well, speaking of automation and maybe some of the resources or actually tooling, Bryson, are there any specific tools or resources that you might recommend those who are listening to manage and optimize not only convertible RIs, or savings plans?
Yeah, so I definitely recommend you check out the AWS Partner Marketplace, and there's going to find a variety of partners on there that may help you in automating your AWS discount commitment coverage or utilization. For AWS native tooling, this isn't discount related, but Compute Optimizer is going to give you up to date, going all the way back, I think now 31 days of right sizing recommendations for your compute instances. That will tie back to your discounts, where if you can drop down a good number of instances by an entire size, say 8XL to 4XL, that's going to free up a ton of your commitment savings that you can spread out to other things. And then as far as other automation, I definitely recommend looking at the AWS well-architected labs and seeing what kind of dashboards you can pull in there to help you forecast your usage.
Bryson, what advice would you give for beginners who are just starting out and exploring not only AWS cost optimization, but cloud financial management? What are some of those initial steps that you would recommend?
Yeah, great question. I'd say first figure out what you don't know. So talk to your stakeholders and your peers to understand the point of your role and who you work with, what is required by you, not required by you, and how your decisions impact downstream people. The second is understanding how you can make it matter for your downstream folks. So if we're talking, say, about forecasting, forecasting is big with every company. You have lots of meetings about it. You have lots of emails about it. If you're, say, a low-level engineer that's being pinged by their boss's boss to forecast, and you just unclear, you need to understand how to make it matter to that person where the decision they make and the information they send up has a downstream impact to the entire company. So being able to tie all that data back into your engagements is going to be key. Then you're not coming to an engagement as a FinOps practitioner with like a stick and saying, oh, you're wasting money. You're coming and saying, we can work together to better optimize your environment, to save you money, to increase your budget to launch this product this year. Think like that.
I think that's really important. Actually, this is what we heard from a lot of our customers too. And it's a challenge, right? As maybe like your boss's boss, and you're kind of like the just up and coming engineer at that level. It's really hard to see at a high level, like what does it mean, like all of this. So it really boils down to like even though it's hard to kind of get across some of the calculations, there's a lot of math involved in FinOps. And I think sometimes it's something that like a lot of engineers may not want to kind of do in their role. I think it's important to just really still get behind the math and really understand what that means to the value of the organization. Does it mean that you get more customers at the end of the day, more revenue? Does it mean that, the customer satisfaction will go up when you build this new product? So like it has to tie to the end value of the business.
Grace, you talk to a lot of customers. Help me understand some of the best practices and advice you give to them when they come to you and say, hey, listen, I'm spending so much in my cloud. What do I do?
Yeah, I think what's important is to understand the real question. So really ask multiple questions to understand the context. Are they spending a lot on the cloud because their company is using a lot of these resources to build new products and applications? Are they experiencing just unexpected changes in this cloud expense? So like get behind what the context is and what that impact is for their organization. Because at the end of the day, it's not really about reducing costs. It's more about like optimizing costs to get the most value out of the cloud. I think that's the encompassing like what they need, the mental thought behind what they need to think about. And so I think getting behind the usage patterns and then what the company is doing in order to using resources in the cloud to do some important development, for instance, is important. Sorry, a little bit.
No, that's great. And if I could, sorry, Grace, if I could just piggyback on top of what you said. One of the super key points is understanding with your customers when they come in, a common complaint is, oh, I'm spending too much on this service, right? Oh, I'm spending too much on compute. I'm spending too much on networking. I'm spending too much on storage. It's very key to go back to them and help them understand, are you spending too much? You're seeing like a dollar amount and you're coming to the table with this dollar that you just want to get lower. What's the business value that dollar amount is providing? Like Grace was saying, do you have an understanding of what your business is delivering to your customers because of that cost? Now the cost might not seem so high because you can view trade-offs of you have this super low latency of delivery to all these customers over the world. That's going to cost this much. We can reduce that cost by reducing these things within our architecture, but now the customer experience goes to X. So helping them better correlate their cost to the end user experience is key.
That's actually a huge point, because if I come to you and say, oh my God, my bill's so huge, I'm spending thousands of dollars on this compute. Okay, but why are you? Well, it's for my customers. It's for my products. I need it for them. Okay, well, we could reduce that. You could reduce the quality that your customers are receiving and ultimately reduce your revenue. So I think it's actually great. It's definitely a good point on understanding what they're utilizing. The valid point on that. I really kind of help I hope that helps everybody understand that you just don't go in and say, I want to reduce my costs. Kind of looking at it, and maybe there are ways you can reduce it, not only, rate optimization, usage optimization, your AWS discount instruments, other ways you can do it. Automation is very key. I got to wrap things up, but Bryson, I got one last question for you and Grace. And I really want to look ahead, look into the future. So pull out your crystal ball and be like, all right, here's what no, I won't hold you to it, by the way. But where do you see some of the biggest opportunities or challenges in cloud cost optimization in the next few years? Actually, I'm going to say the next couple of months, because years is very long in technology.
I'll say top of mind for me is customers really understanding the use case of Gen AI, LLM, and then the different kinds of accelerated computing instances that AWS is coming out with. So while they are very hot commodity right now, hot topic, understanding how they are going to use them for their end services and how that usage of the end services therefore can reduce other cloud costs, and then how we're going to figure out how to optimize that usage long term.
Grace, what do you think some of the biggest opportunities or even the challenges in cloud cost optimization are happening in the next couple of months or even years?
I think the number one challenge is still with automation, as I mentioned, because I think automation still has a long way to go. I think there are a lot of tools that do some kind of automation, but there could be some conservative automation. It's not fully automating because there might be risks and downsides, right? If you want to right size and you don't right size right, or you're aggressively right sizing, and that could affect the performance of your applications. It's not just that. There's so many other considerations for usage optimization that makes it really, really challenging. I think that, multiple clouds and managing cost optimization across multiple clouds is going to be something that's going to be important, because I think you can have one person work on that, but it's really hard because every single cloud provider has a different kind of cost optimization mechanism depending on the services you use. The pricing is also different. The discount instruments are different. So it's impossible for one person to do it. What I've seen is a lot of customers have a GCP team or an Azure team or an AWS team. So I think there's a long way to go with maybe automating and aggregating it into one platform across different clouds to optimize for the organization. And I haven't really seen a holy grail type of solution that's able to do that, because there are just so many complexities. And then I think the other side of things is just maturity of just FinOps culture in general. I think we'll see a lot more opportunities there. I think with the FinOps Foundation and other cloud providers, Bryson, with AWS, just educating customers, I think that's already a big step forward.
If I can just piggyback right off of that, Grace, you scratched an itch in my brain. One big thing that I see coming up also is the difficulty in creating a source of truth for cost optimization savings. So I want to be clear, I'm not saying source of truth of the data points. I'm not saying source of truth of usage data or the CUR or this, but we're finding with these larger and larger customers, as you have a variety of ways in which you can change your AWS usage and optimize it, that creates different kinds of thought paths of how much that will save over time. And each of those paths, each of those things is more math, more models, different savings numbers over time. Finance teams and accounting teams, at least in my experience, are having a difficulty in reconciling all of that, as leaderships just want, say, one number. And they want one forecast and one number that they're going to see it. And then when that one number differs from reality, it just causes a lot of churn.
I'm actually going to add on to a little bit from a life experience that I'm going through right now, and kind of a little bit of analogy of seeing two different types of costs. I'm in the middle of purchasing a new vehicle, and while I see one number and I am putting all my math behind it, what I'm going to do, the discount, the APR, how much I'm going to put down, and I send it over to the dealership, they come back and I don't understand your numbers. How did you get to that? I'm like, well, this is my math. This is how I got to it. I said, no, you got to do this. They send theirs. I'm like, I don't understand theirs. And I think it's just understanding and the numbers and how you got there and how you're utilizing them and the different discounts and rebates and everything that goes on top of that is just help me understand the data and the value and the discounts that are being applied to my cloud. I mean, is that somewhat close to an analogy, Bryson?
Yeah, very close. And then you add on to that, oh, well, you could go with that car or this car that's a hybrid that has this, or you could go with this lease, or you could, and you need to make a decision now.
And the rebates that go with each one and the discounts for each one, then you have to understand it. Like, well, how did my trade-in value go lower because I went with that vehicle versus this one? Like, I am so confused. It's very overwhelming. I'm sure we all experience. I've got to wrap things up. I mean, this has been very informative. We were talking about not only the different AWS discount instruments from savings plans, CRIs, RIs, the validating them, the best practices, what are happening within the world. I really appreciate it. Bryson, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Grace, thank you so much for joining me on this episode.
Thanks, John.
Well, everybody, this has been another awesome episode and discussion around Faces in FinOps, powered by our great friends at ProsperOps. Be sure to hit that like, subscribe, and check out the ProsperOps blog, because guess what? We're out of here.